Welcome everyone to today's webinar on FBAR and BOI, the first in a series of webinars on bank account compliance. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we compare and contrast report of foreign bank and financial accounts, that is FBAR, and beneficial ownership information, that is BOI, as well as considering BOI reporting requirements and how to navigate this new regulation. Our speakers for today are Jason Campbell, Business Development Leader at Strategic Treasurer, and Craig Jeffrey, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Jason and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it, as always. And welcome, everybody. And we're so happy to have everybody join us on this wonderful Tuesday. I hope your week has started off absolutely fantastic. And Craig and I are excited to have the discussion today around FBAR and BOI, or BOI, or however you want to kind of pronounce that acronym. I know that we always love our acronyms in our worlds. But today's topic is the discussion as we go through and kind of the information that you'll have over this next 30 minutes with us. We're going to kind of go back and talk about the history and some distinctives of around FBAR and BOI. Talk a little bit more about BOI being this new regulatory event that's going to be occurring, that's going to have some impact, and how things that we can ensure that we're all in compliance on. Who does it apply to and what needs to be filed? Then we're going to go through and talk about the filing deadlines, as this is new. So we want to make sure that we have it on our radar, we put things on our calendar, we prepare, and we're ready to submit whatever information is being required of your organization, if it does qualify. So we're going to talk about a little about those deadlines, and then as well as going into finalizing, how to move forward through some practical implications there. So before we get into a little bit more in depth on each of these particular subjects, Craig, if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk about the context of BOI and really kind of how did we get to this point, right? So what is, how did BOI really come be a part of what we need to be worried about or concerned about, or how to prepare for it? How did this come to this point where we're at in this intersection of this regulation? So with the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020 that came into place, for another acronym, AML, as some of you may know it as, really mandated that financial institutions must establish risk-based programs with reasonable designs to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. So it's a way to really kind of find out, and try to capture those criminal activities. And additionally, these institutions were obligated to comply with some record-keeping mandates that they all to ensure that they were being able to pinpoint where the transactions and things were happening. And then to kind of put it a little more narrow focus, as part of this act, Congress introduced the Corporate Transparency Act of 2021 to reinforce its efforts in discouraging criminals from infiltrating the U.S. financial system with their unlawfully acquired funds. The act mandates that specific companies to disclose details about their beneficial owners and company applicants to FinCEN under the Department of Treasury. This information can assist the government in effectively preventing such illicit activities and hopefully capturing more of the criminals. Which leads us to the final rule of beneficial ownership that was put into place on September 30th of 2022. And so with this final rule from the U.S. Department of Treasury, it's implementing the beneficial ownership reporting requirements of the Corporate Transparency Act that we just discussed. The final rule requires certain entities organized or registered to conduct business in the United States to disclose identifying and beneficial ownership information, otherwise known as BOI, to the U.S. federal government. So that kind of puts it into perspective, why are we here talking about this? How did we get to this point? And, how do we handle the situations, or how do we make sure that we're in compliance with this regulation moving forward? Which is going to lead us into our first polling question. So when we think about filing for BOI, it's a single option here. For filing for BOI will be in the FinCENs, as we already talked about. But which system will BOI actually be filed within? So if you want to go ahead and submit your response there. And then also for us to, I know we always like to provide, the answers to the polling questions and the answers to our audience to have on hand. As you've answered this polling question, it would be fantastic to see 65 responses in the chat. If you guys can put in the word poll in chat, and we will release the information of the polling question. We'll just give everybody.
Would BOI also work if they type in BOI? Would that count?
Yeah, if they type in BOI in chat, we will take that. If we can get 65 participants on this call today to type in poll or BOI or BOI, that will be an acceptable response for us to make sure that we share these polling questions and responses. It'd be great if somebody put, yeah, BOI in there. That'd be fun too.
Right.
All right, go ahead, Craig.
Well, this is interesting. So this was a trick question. There's only two systems that actually exist: beneficial ownership secure system, or BOSS, right? BSA e-filing is what is used for FBAR. The beneficial ownership secure system, the 22% identified, is the correct one. That's where BOI will be filed. The beneficial ownership reporting system, or BORS, is made up. So is beneficial ownership tracking system with bots. So obviously the bots thing didn't fool too many people, but just some interesting information to bring a little bit of light to that. So thank you for responding. So it's the BOSS system, which we'll look at. And thanks for joining. I'll add that to what Brian said and what Jason said for joining us on this. I know that compliance, bank account management, know your customer, FBAR, and BOI, these are probably not a few of your favorite things, but let's do a quick contrast between FBAR and BOI, because they are filed or will be filed through FinCEN, part of the Department of Treasury. So they're both similar in that there's an element of financial transparency and accountability for foreign bank account reporting, as well as for who has ownership interest in various companies. So it all stems from some of the same type of concepts, slightly different legal structure, as Jason went through the AML and then some of the subsequent rules. So FBAR uses the BSA e-filing system. So that was the fourth choice. The BOI requires beneficial ownership secure system, which is being created and is expected to be up and ready to file on January 1st, 2024, I think on New Year's Day. So between FBAR and BOI, what are the differences? FBAR focuses on foreign bank accounts. A lot of people use the FBAR for foreign bank account reporting. There's a larger name for that, but it's, if you have over a certain amount of money in foreign bank accounts, those require reporting. And that's heavily focused on tax evasion and grew in emphasis for in the last 10 years due to terrorist financing, to make sure that the money trail would be captured or available to be found. Who manages that? That's Treasury and Tax. If you move over to BOI or BOI, who manages that? That's going to be Treasury and Legal. Perhaps Legal would take a lead in that. Treasury supports it, perhaps the other way. Whereas FBAR is oftentimes Treasury, frequently Tax. Treasury has to play a part in FBAR. Treasury will expect it to be at least playing some part in the BOI filing. And this is focused on who are the ultimate beneficial owners. And there were examples of Russian, I call oligarchs and others who owned entities that received ERC money, received money from COVID, and have used that to launder money. They may not be signers on the account, but they're beneficial owners. And so this is a way of weeding that out, eliminating that way that people have hid their funds. So that's probably the first thing to think about between those two. Similar type of purposes and meant to close the loophole. So who is required to file for FBAR and how frequently is the filing? Well, FBAR filing is an annual filing. There's a requirement for the institutions or corporations, as you can see on the bottom, and there's a requirement for individuals. And if you have a 10,000 US dollar aggregate balance on any day, you're required to file. And so this originally FBAR started out with individuals who had funds. Let's say in Switzerland, you had over $10,000, you were required to file, so that there was not, so that you wouldn't be hiding money, and the ability to have that tax. So that was the original start, but that expanded to institutions with a heavier focus on making sure that money wouldn't be moved. If money was moved, it would be able to be tracked to who moved it, especially if it's involved in crime or terrorism. And so there's an individual filing. If you are responsible for this, you have to sign on your tax form. You have to indicate what countries, and then there's an individual filing that needs to be made if you have foreign accounts or if you have signing authority. And there's two types of signing authority for institutions. On the institution side, if you can sign and move money on an account for your company, you are considered a signer. If you have the ability on your own or acting with someone else to move money, in other words, if you have portal access and you can approve a wire or initiate a wire or a transfer, that would be considered signing authority from FinCEN's perspective. And you can argue that it's not really signing authority, it's just funds transfer authority, but it's defined there and specifically identified. Acting alone or in conjunction with another person can move funds. So that's where the requirements are. So companies have to file as well as individuals. There's some exceptions. Lots of you have been familiar with this for more than 5 or 8 years, seeing the requirements. So that's FBAR. But let's shift over from the annual FBAR filing requirements to BOI. Who is required to file? These would be any type of reporting companies, and they're identified with that definition, which says those that are required to file, both domestic and foreign entities. So there's a number of examples that have to file, and FinCEN, their estimation is that the first year, which would be in 2024, the very beginning of this next year, over 32 million entities will be filing. So that's a guess, but that's what they think the first year. Afterwards, they think it'll be about 5 million filings per year, and that'll be filings for new entities and for entities that either have a change or if there's an entity that needs to be corrected with the information that's required to file for BOI. There's a lot of companies that are excluded. If you just have a publicly traded company, 100% fully owned subsidiaries, there's expectation that there's no requirement to file for those. But when you have things like joint ventures, you might have LLCs that are not 100% reporting, it might be hanging outside. There is an examples that you need to go through in some depth. But back onto FBAR, there's a question. Those that execute EFTs on a bank portal also have to be signers for FBAR. That is correct. That's the FBAR definition. We can share more information either separately or we have some material we can share with you. We also have this continuing series, but yes, those that are physical bank signers as well as those that can move money that's for FBAR. So from a BOI perspective, there's a lot of companies that are exempt and a lot of smaller companies, particularly LLCs, limited liability partnerships, that can be included. And they may be excluded, but they can be included, and it requires some work to look at that. So what needs to be reported? Beneficial ownership and information reporting, or BOI. There's initial requirements for the startup phase. So in January, every entity that has to file will have to file by then. After that, it's every time there's a new company set up, there's a change or a correction, the filing has to be made, and not made annually, but made within 30 days of the change. So I just want to put that in your head. We got an image for the flow in just a bit that we'll show you, but there's two key names here that we're going to emphasize. Beneficial owners, those who they exert control or they have ownership of more than a certain percentage, 25% or more of a reporting company. So substantial control can be the CEO. It could be someone who's directing what the company's doing. It could be a type of manager or somebody who has 25% of the ownership interest in a reporting company. So at a consumer level, if you set up an LLC, it's not particularly large, and there's 3 people on it, all at 33%. They're all beneficial owners. All will have to file the first year. You won't have to file after that until someone changes, it's sold, or there's a difference. The corporate level, maybe you have there's a few LLCs that are hanging out there separate. they're not 100% owned. Those would have to be filed. And if the company changes who's a owner or who has substantial control over this separate entity, a change will have to be filed. And the change has to be filed within 30 days of when that occurs. So BOI reporting is going to be when there's a change in the future, but the time frame is a 30-day window. Company applicants, this is interesting. When we start, any entity that exists as of 12/31 this year, you won't have to file the company applicants because that's considered, I guess, grandfathered in would be how we would put it. But after that, starting January 1st, company applicants have to file as well. So those who file the initial documents to set it up with the Secretary of State, for example, or with one of the Indian entities in the U.S., those would be considered the company applicant. And there's a maximum of 2 company applicants, but everybody who sets it up is responsible for directing or controlling this type of filing. So the setting up of the entity, the applicant has to be identified. So if you need to get some entity set up and you don't want to file as a company applicant, get that stuff through before December so you can avoid having to do one additional filing. But beneficial owners is everyone. So thank you for that. Now let's look at the deadlines. We get concerned about deadlines and penalties. So this is just a way of visually showing you this information of the deadlines. And Brian, I don't know if you're sticking a link in the chat box or if we're just showing that at the end, but we have a document for you to sign, a white paper for you to download, not to sign. I guess we're too much on the signing part, but Jason, when people look at the deadlines, they're going to see existing entities and new entities. So existing entities are those that are registered before the end of this year, and then new entities are after that fact. But when you look at it, if you see the range, it's like if you filed before, you only have to do the beneficial ownership filing. You won't have to report company applicants, but you still have to report who the beneficial owners are. If they existed before December 31st, the filing has to be done by January 1st, 2025, which means you want to file it during 2024. But that's the reporting deadline. The BOSS system is expected to be ready January 1st, 2024. So you could file ahead of time for all of these existing companies. New entities, whenever it's formed, this has to be filed within 30 days from forming. You have to file the beneficial owners and the company applicants. So new companies will have to be filed. If you start a company on January 1st, by the 31st, you're going to have to file 30 days later, I guess, or maybe the 30th, you're going to have to file who are the beneficial owners and the company applicant. So any entity formed in 2024 has to take place. Any changes that occur during 2024 and on have to be reported in 30 days, or if there's an error and you're correcting it, within 30 days of the discovery of the error. So we can think it's a long time till January 1st, 2025, but it's not. You have to file before then, and you have to set up a process to report beneficial owners and company applicants prior to that time. So I know that's going to generate dozens of questions. You can see some items in the chat box about where you can add some more questions. We're not going to be able to get too many today. I know you have probably 100 questions. We'll probably answer 50 of them on today's webinar. We'll try to continue from there. That brings us to poll question number 2. It's a stacked poll question. In other words, there's 2 poll questions in one frame. These are select a single choice. And this is, again, guess what it is. The penalties for failing to comply with BOI reporting can be up to $50 a day per account, $250 a day, $500 a day, $5,000 a day. Rules on the penalties are not yet finalized. Those are the options. And then the penalties for failing to comply with BOI reporting include up to criminal penalties. There's 3 options there. And so that's the section on criminal penalties. So we're identifying civil and criminal, which are common. in the different domains of compliance. But there are no criminal penalties yet finalized, or are there? Same thing with civilian rules, and if so, what are those? While you're doing that, I would invite you to look in the chat box. There is the download the white paper. There's a short bit link. Go ahead and click that, download the white paper. I'm not saying we have a bet in the office about how many people will download it, but that would help me out quite a bit. So go ahead and click it, download it. You're not going to be pestered any more than you're pestered because you filled out your name and email address because you're already on the webinar. So that's an option. And then finally, invite you to follow Strategic Treasure on LinkedIn. That would be quite helpful. Also, would love to connect with you as well. So, Jason, what is the correct answer?
I don't
Do you
know.
remember?
I think that getting your expertise here. I think looking at what we have going on the screen here, there's a lot of different. It's up in the air.
500. It's $500 a day. Yeah. So 23% of you selected that. Pretty good. So we try to make that tricky. And the correct answer, this is interesting. It's a $10,000 fine. Criminal penalty is $10,000 fine and 2 years in prison. That is 5% answered that way. So I was very tricky in putting those together, but 2 years in prison for failing to comply with it. So there's always which ones are they doing if you're intentionally trying to hide something? That's when they tend to enforce it to the full measure. But it's a $10,000 fine and 2 years in prison. So the 2 years in prison is the particularly hard part there. Puts a damper on quite a bit of the activities you want to be doing. All right. Thank you for responding to those. I think we have enough poll responses.
We need 10 more. Oh, no. So we got 8 more. 8 more. 8
more. You can do it. We know you can do it. All right. I'll turn it back over to you. And I see we passed the limit, so we're over. You guys did great. Jason, what do people need to do about this? That's the key question, right?
I think that's the big thing, right? Because number one, I don't know about anybody else, but I don't look good in orange or stripes. I just be honest, it's not my color wheel. So to avoid 2 years of prison or any type of prison time is really what we're trying to shoot for, right? So we want to make sure that we're in compliance here. So as we look at what's on this flow chart here that we have, and just kind of understanding, do you know whether your company is subject to BOI or not? And I think Craig talked about this, and he highlighted this piece of it, how important it is to have that inventory of your entities. When's the last time, as many organizations have grown, have changed, sold, acquisitions, things of that nature, is, what's really what does the company structure really look like, and having that inventory and making sure your house is kind of cleaned up and buttoned up. So there's times to respond now. So even though, yes, as Craig said, 2025 is it's really not that far away if you really think about it, right? Here it is, it's July of this year, and it's gone by so fast, and time will just continue to tick on. So it's got to be one of those things to want to be prepared and not have it all of a sudden sprung upon. You want to identify those exemptions and reporting obligations, and really understanding, the full law itself around the reporting and what needs to happen to ensure that you are in compliance, and really have that determination of, is your company subject to this requirement? And again, as Craig had mentioned earlier, who's responsible for BOI and who's responsible for FBAR? It's just those things, understand, working with Treasury and working with legal to make sure that your company, your organization is in compliance. And if it is subject to this, then there's that reporting process, right? You want to know where to capture the information to be reported, looking at those legal records, your bank account management database. Those are just things to go ahead and start looping in, whether it's maybe you got to put an internal team together, maybe you're already on top of that, which is great. This will be an easy process for you. And for those, and maybe, how long has it been since an inventory check has occurred? There might be some uphills that be coming on your way pretty soon. So, and who's going to capture it, who files it, and again, who supports it is really that legal and that Treasury group. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts. There's going to be some collaboration, and it's just really working with your internal teams to ensure that avoiding those orange and stripes jumpsuits. All right, next slide. And as we talk about some key takeaways, ideas and points to bring back to the office, right? So compliance, number one, you want to ensure that you truly are compliant with both your FBAR and BOI if you're subject to those items there, and avoid those senseless penalties, both from a monetary perspective and then anything else that could be jeopardizing for an organization. You want to be thorough. As we talked about just now, you want to be thorough, take inventory, and it's probably good to take stock already. If you haven't, it's good to ensure that you have what needs to occur in any of your entities and make sure what's active and what's not active, and start that process to clean that up sooner rather than later. And then I think we talked about it, Craig, already, just like we're doing this on this webinar today, but let's go ahead and talk about those final two takeaways.
Yeah, so as you do the inventory of the entities and you figure out who's doing what, a discussion between legal and treasury has to take place. Take the initiative. Don't wait for the other group to talk about it. And, as Jason said, you need to do an inventory now, because let's say you have 100 entities in your corporate structure and 5 of them are subject to it. You could have to do some filing very early, anytime there's a change or a correction starting in January, or anytime you set up something new. So you have to have a process set up before the end of this year. The existing entities won't need to be filed until January 1st, 2025, no later than then. So we do recommend getting that stuff done this summer, and we have information on the white paper that you can see what's a tentative deadline. And then, this is a good time. It's something that's been proposed. It's a final rule. It's coming. The date exists there. So read about it. We have a number of other topics. We have the white paper, and consider getting external help. Once you find out what's going on, getting additional help can make a lot of sense to smooth the process for you, particularly in the beginning, as you get up to speed. So like many people outsource FBAR filings, this could fall into that same category. Thanks for paying attention here. There's information in the chat box about the white paper. Please go ahead and download that now, particularly because I would like to win the bet we have.
Help Craig, please.
Help me. No jail time, but thanks, Jason. And Brian, we turn it back over to you now.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And as Craig mentioned, for more on bank account compliance, specifically FBAR and BOI, be sure to download our white paper on this topic by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.